Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches English Language and Literature A-Level. In this video, I'm going to be talking you through exam technique and how to approach the question for the Paper 2 Section B, Variety in Languages and Literature. Although some of the examples I'm going to give you are going to be based on the individual and society, this does aim to give you overall technique that will be relevant to all of the themes. So regardless of which text you're studying, do tune in and hopefully this will help you prepare. So let's get started.
Okay, so let's just remind ourselves of what the assessment objectives are and just a breakdown of the questions. So as you know, this is the second part of the paper, and the paper is split up. So the first task, which is the unseen, is worth 20 marks, whereas this one is worth 30 marks. So it's definitely the more important. So I personally recommend that you spend a little bit longer. So if the exam is 2.5 hours long, I've said maybe hour and 10 for the unseen, hour and 20 for the comparison. Having said that, depending on what unseen it is you might actually smash through it in an hour and think I've managed it, and you might be able to dedicate an hour and a half. You've kind of got to look at your own strengths, but just don't forget that this is the heavily weighted. So if you are sort of going off on one on your extract and you suddenly realize you're an hour and 15, for the love of God, move over, because like I said, 30 marks. Just like with the parrot text in paper 1, you are looking at all of the assessment objectives bar the ones that we reserve for coursework. So we've got making sense, answering the question, using terminology. We've got analysing literary and linguistic concepts, which basically means language structure and form. We've got context, in which texts are produced and received, and we have got connections across text. So this is another one where your comparison is important, okay? And I'll talk you through that more in a moment. So you're in the exam. What's the first thing you do? Of course, you're going to read the question and make a plan. Super important. So if this is a question that stumps you a little bit, you may just need to do a massive brain dump of ideas, just thinking about absolutely everything that springs to mind in relation to that question. It might be that you hit upon a question that you're like, I've either done something similar or I've already got an essay plan that I've done in my revision. Golden. That's absolutely brilliant. If that is the case, then just jot you down some key ideas. But if it's something that gets you that you haven't really thought of before, brain dump your ideas and then refine them. And this is the most important thing, is that you establish an angle, because no matter which theme it is you're doing, whether it's encounters or individual and society, whatever it might be, the questions are so big, there is no way that you can cover everything. So establish an argument and then start coming up with the ideas that essentially answer or develop that argument, that line of thought. So you're going to need to evaluate the most useful parts of the text to consider. If you know your text well, you know where the useful stuff is, okay? So when I'm saying evaluate the most useful parts of the text, I'm going to use an example from Othello, sorry for the people doing other ones. But for example, so many students just go, oh, I'm going to analyse the ram bit, because you know it's really easy to analyse. But if it doesn't suit the question, don't use it. You know, make sure that you are evaluating, this backs up my argument really strongly, and it has really useful literary linguistic concepts in the quotes. And also make sure that you're actually planning for comparisons. It is a bad idea in my mind to go, here are my Gatsby points, here are my Othello points, or here are my Wuthering Heights thoughts, here's my romantic poetry thoughts, or here's my bloody chamber thoughts, you know what I mean? You've actually got to be thinking, right, from the word go, where are my connections? Where are my connections? And that's what I'd be saying about your revision. So take your big themes, go through past papers and plan out comparative points, yeah? Don't plan in isolation. So for example, let's imagine this question: evaluate the effectiveness of the methods used by the writers of your study text to present how relationships are impacted upon by social constraints. So again, I'm just going to use individual and society because that's the one that I know, that's the one that I teach. But in my mind, the moment I'm thinking, right, so relationships is enormous. So I've got to make a decision. Do I want to talk about romantic relationships, family relationships, friendship relationships? Do I want to talk about paternal relationships with daughters? Like, what type of relationship do I need to angle? And in my mind, I'm going to think to myself, do you know what? I'm just going to hit romantic relationships because across those two texts, yeah, that's what you see. Yeah, of course, there's stuff you could talk about fathers and children, loads on Othello, not so much on Gatsby. So romantic relationships, that makes most sense. And then I'm going to think to myself, right, who are the ones that I need to compare? Because of course there are relationships, there are sort of 3-ish relationships for each text. I can't do all of them. Like, that's going to just end up a really bitty essay that doesn't have any cohesion. So actually, I'm just going to stick to the big 2. I'm literally going to do Othello and Desdemona, and I'm going to do Gatsby and Daisy, and I'm going to look at the way that society creates characters who are insecure about their own position and therefore cannot trust or can trust too much in the relationships that they've established. So that's my angle. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to think about writing an introduction. Now, I've got a couple of ideas here for you. Here's the basics of what you need to kind of think about. That angle needs to be set out for the examiner. That's why you need to have planned. Yeah, you've got to have planned so that you know what your angle is, so that you know where you're going. Okay, and you're going to position that angle as the most relevant, important, or the central argument to the question, to the whole debate. That's why you've chosen it. Okay, but you're going to avoid I statements. You know, you're not going to say, I think that, blah, blah, blah. You might instead say, arguably, the most central relationship affected by social constraints is the relationship of. Arguably, you know, that's your way of hedging. Okay, and also be careful of vague statements that just parrot the question back. Quite often, students are using the introduction as a way to get started rather than thinking about it as having a purpose. And I'm going to show you a bad example in a moment, one that I've written. I'm not shaming one of my students, that'd be awful, but one that I've written that kind of does this vague statement, I statement thing, and it's just a kind of meaningless intro. Do try and sit your angle or your argument, your line of thought in some relevant context, something that supports your position. You know, why not hit AO1, AO3 and AO4 all in the same moment in your introduction? Show your examiner you know exactly what's going on. Okay, here's an example of what not to do. I've done it within that last question in mind, and again, individual and society, but even if you don't do these texts, you might recognize this desperate intro. That's what I'm going to call it, a desperate intro. Oh God, I've got to write something intro. Societal constraints upon relationships is an issue that is important in both Othello and Gatsby because of the influence of society on the characters and what they say and do. Societal constraints is something that affects a range of characters' relationships and is therefore a major theme. I'm going to discuss how both Fitzgerald and Shakespeare use a range of devices to present their ideas about relationships, including metaphor, dramatic irony, and language. Oh, woof. Okay, so the main issues here, right, for this fake candidate who has just used an introduction to get started and they know an examiner wants to see one, is they've not actually said anything specific. You know, they've said it's important, they've not said why. They've said that there are societal constraints, they've not said what they are. They've said it affects a range of characters' behaviours and what they think and do, but not said who or what those behaviours are. And then they have done the absolute horror show of the, you know, I am going to discuss. Please banish that. No one wants to know. I am going to discuss, you know, and then this idea of saying what devices you're going to discuss. Bin it, bin it, bin it, bin it. Don't want to see it in your intros, okay? Instead, do something that has purpose, that sets out the argument, shows your examiner what to expect, but without being like, I'm going to tell you all about the play, you know, like this. You'll notice it's a bit longer. In Shakespeare's Othello and Fitzgerald's Great Gatsby, societal concerns of race, gender and class have a direct influence on all types of relationships. Perhaps the most impacted upon, however, is the notion of the romantic relationship, where issues to do with race and class can prohibit free choices of marriage for both protagonists of the respective texts. Boom! We now know that I am writing about romantic relationships and how society stops people from having freedom of choice in marriage. I haven't needed to say, in this essay I am going to discuss. I've just said this is the most important concern. Now I'm going to hit it in a little bit more context. This is probably, you could argue that this doesn't need to be as long, but I'm sort of setting it out. Another one contributing societal factor is the presence of misogyny in both the 1920s and the 1600s, and how patriarchal constructs can reinforce unfair power dynamics between male and female partnerships. Although the Roaring Twenties saw growing freedom for women, there was too a rise of anti-feminist feelings and misogyny was rife. In the Jacobean era, misogyny stemmed from fear of cuckoldry, fear of female deceit. And so despite being set years apart, these societal factors clearly have an impact on the characters of both texts and their relationships. Okay, so I've been very, very clear here about what this essay is going to be about without saying I am going to. And I've hit AO1 because I'm answering the question. I have hit AO3 because I've introduced relevant context that supports the arguments that I'm going to make. And I've also hit AO4 because all the way through I am comparing, okay? And it's not just because I've put both of their names in the first sentence. The fact that I'm actually saying that the societal constraints are relevant to both contexts. Because remember, your comparisons can be plot, character, theme, context, devices. It can be everything, okay? So that's a bit more like it. That's what we're aiming for. And again, even if you're not doing individual and society, this is still relevant to you. Right, quick tips on the main body. Okay, so your main kind of comparative analytical paragraphs. Okay, so like I said, it is better to do a deep dive on a narrow angle than a superficial bounce around lots of different examples. Okay, so if I bounced around all three relationships, I'd end up writing a paragraph on Othello and Desdemona, and a paragraph on Gatsby and Daisy, and then a paragraph on Myrtle and Tom, and then a paragraph on Cassio and Bianca, and then a paragraph on Jordan. Do you see what I mean? And nothing is going to have development. So choose your angle. Don't be afraid to write slightly longer paragraphs, yeah, so that you can get in lots more detail. So develop a line of thought thoroughly. That's kind of what I mean, is that, you know, you're not in GCSE now where it's going to be like, put your one quote in to back up your point. You're going to need to quote regularly. You should have multiple quotes in your paragraphs. Okay, integrate your comparisons throughout. So don't go, here's my section on Gatsby, here's my section on Othello, or here's my section on Wuthering Heights, and here's my section on poetry. You've got to make sure that you're dealing with both of them all the way through. So try and make your overarching topic sentence comparative. So go topic sentence that's comparative, then go text 1, comparative link, text 2, yeah? And you can ping backwards and forwards as well. And so I've already said that. So embed short quotations regularly and fluently, okay? And then obviously develop those with your key analysis of literary and linguistic context. Now, when I say keep that tight, you're going to try and avoid the waffle. Be as concise but detailed as you can. You want your examiner, I know they do on a computer, but imagine your teacher at home marking. You want that person marking it to be like, oh, yep, 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 yep. Like almost just being like, yep, point, 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 point. That's what you want. So nice and tight. Oh, sorry, last one, and integrate context, which is leading me on to a model for you. Again, apologies about the fact that it's Othello and Gatsby, but hopefully the style of this will help. So this is an example that is very good on AO2. Okay, it's very, very strong on AO2, and you'll see what I mean because I'll kind of mark it out as I read it to you. In both Othello and The Great Gatsby, women are presented to be fully aware of the oppression they suffer. So I'm making a comparison, it's a similarity. Now I'm moving into one text. Fitzgerald's presentation of Daisy's wishes for her own child are bleak. So that's my AO1 there. She hopes that she will be a beautiful little fool, as that's the best thing a girl can be in this world. Okay, so I've embedded in my quotes. Note the way I've broken it up to make it make sense grammatically. This pessimism is emphasized through the use of superlative, best, acknowledging that stupidity and beauty are the ultimate combination. Beauty to be desirable, but foolish so not to understand their own suffering. So I'm hitting my AO2 there, and I got some critical terminology. Ultimately, this demonstrates that Daisy is more intelligent and self-aware than she might have appeared earlier, perhaps suggesting that she plays the fool. The idea of beauty and stupidity being attractive qualities is echoed, so here's my comparative link, in what Iago says in Act 2, Scene 1 of Othello, using a series of epigrams, so there is a bit of critical terminology for you, focusing on form. Shakespeare presents Iago's view of women in the presence of his wife and Desdemona, claiming that she never yet was foolish, she was fair, for even her folly helped her to an heir. In this rhyming couplet, more form critical terminology, Iago jokes that beauty and stupidity go hand in hand. It suggests that a woman's prerogative is to get an heir, and folly is an effective tool to achieve it. Female inferiority and submissiveness is also presented in the emphasis placed on a woman's duty to be obedient. After marrying Othello, Desdemona understands that she has a divided duty and uses logic to present her loyalty to Othello being transferred from her loyalty to her father. Despite Shakespeare signposting that Desdemona is outspoken and intelligent here, she still plays upon the concept of her own obedience, demonstrating that she is aware of her situation. This is because, for both Gatsby and Othello, women were still treated as inferior to men, and so both are indicative of the time periods. Okay, so I'm hitting AO1, I'm hitting AO2, and I'm hitting AO4 because it's comparative. And then what I'm doing with my AO3 is I'm tacking it on at the end. And this is something, and you know, that's fair. What I've said is true, but it's like the context is an afterthought. It's not being used to develop something thoroughly. Okay, so here is the same paragraph with the same analysis, but with the context integrated a little bit more thoroughly, okay? And I've highlighted it in yellow so that makes sense for you. Okay. In both Othello and The Great Gatsby, women are presented to be fully aware of the oppression they suffer due to the expectations set from within their respective patriarchal societies. Immediately, I'm doffing my cap to context. Fitzgerald's presentation of Daisy's wish for her own child at Bleak, she hopes that she'll be a beautiful little fool, as that's the best thing a girl can be in this world. This pessimism is emphasised through the use of the superlative best, acknowledging that stupidity and beauty, the ultimate combination, beauty to be desirable, but foolish so not to understand the lack of options and rights that a woman had during the 1920s. Again, doffing my cap to context. And it's actually being used there to expand the analysis. I won't reread all of this again because it's exactly the same as before, but I'll scooch down to here. In this rhyming couplet, Iago jokes that beauty and stupidity go hand in hand. It suggests that a woman's prerogative is to get an heir, and folly is an effective tool to achieve it. Iago may be joking here, but it is a frightening reflection of the misogynistic values of the Jacobean era, a complete belief in female inferiority that is carried through even to the time that Gatsby was written. So note how I've put in context here, and I've made the link back to Gatsby as well. And then I move on to the development of my paragraph. Female inferiority and submissiveness is also presented in the emphasis placed on a woman's duty to be obedient. Desdemona and Othello have had a clandestine marriage, the equivalent of the 17th century fleet marriage, a great betrayal of her father, who typically would have chosen her husband based on political alliance or financial gain. Desdemona, therefore, understands that she has a divided duty. So do you notice here that my context is really, really specific? Like, I'm not just saying expectations of the time period. I've actually given something very, very specific about types of marriages, and I've used that to inform the rest of my analysis about Desdemona's divided duty. So that is how you integrate your context much more sort of naturally and in a much more integrated way. Okay, I hope that was helpful for you. I know that it was very much focused on Gatsby and Othello. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to provide model paragraphs on the others, but what I will do is I'll put a link into the comments for some exemplar material for paper 2, and then have a look. I know you're going to find some of them are weighted again with Othello and Gatsby. It's because it's the more popular the more popular texts across all of the themes, but there are some other examples, and there are loads of examples of section A as well, so it's worthwhile everyone having a look at. Give me a shout if you've got any other questions. Otherwise, I will say thank you so much for watching. Massive good luck for your exams, especially if you're sitting them tomorrow for the 2023 series. So that's it. Thank you so much and happy revising.